The cards lay flat on the green table. A single gas lamp hung low from the ceiling, throwing yellow light over the circle of men. Thomas Cooper stared at his fingers. They were wet with sweat. He looked at the paper notes piled in front of Douglas Crane. Every single piece of paper represented something Thomas used to own. His store on the corner, his horses, the carriage with the leather seats, and the deed to the house where his wife was currently sleeping. Douglas leaned forward. He was a thick man with a gold chain stretched tight across his vest. He picked up a cigar from the silver tray, took a slow puff, and blew the smoke directly into the center of the table. Two other men, neighbors from the neighborhood, sat in the corner chairs. They held their drinks tightly, looking at the floor. Nobody wanted to meet Thomas's eyes. "That is the end of it, Thomas," Douglas said. He tapped his thick thumb against the stack of deeds. "The bank closes its books tomorrow at noon. You owe $50,000 to the house and $30,000 to me personally. I have the papers right here. You cannot pay." Thomas reached for his glass, but his hand shook so much the ice rattled against the side. He put it down without drinking. "Give me another week, Douglas. I can speak to the managers at the shipping docks. I have friends there." Douglas laughed. The sound was short and dry. "Your friends spent the last 3 hours watching you lose every dollar you have. The docks will not help you. By tomorrow afternoon, the movers will be at your front door. Your family will be on the street." He leaned closer, his boots scraping against the floorboards. "But I am a reasonable man. I need a wife to run my new house in the city. Your daughter, Maeve, is 23. She's quiet. She knows how to manage a home." Thomas stood up so fast his chair hit the wall behind him. "No," he said, his voice loud in the small room. "You leave her out of this. She is a person, Douglas. I am not trading my family to pay for a bad night with the cards." Douglas did not move. He simply counted the papers in front of him, sliding them into a neat pile. "Then start packing your boxes tonight, Thomas. Your son Sam will have to pack his bags at the academy too. I hear the tuition there is quite high. Without your name on these papers, he is out by Monday morning." The two men in the corner shifted their weight but stayed silent. The rules of the club were simple. A gentleman paid his debts, or he disappeared from society. There was no middle ground. The heavy oak door of the card room opened without a sound. The warm, smoky air of the room suddenly felt cold, like someone had opened a window to the winter night. A man walked in. He was taller than anyone else in the room, his shoulders broad under a long coat of dark wool. His hair was completely white, cut straight and clean around his face. His skin looked like polished white stone under the yellow gas lamp. He had dark eyes that looked almost black, showing no expression at all. He walked past the corner chairs, his boots making no sound on the heavy rug. He stopped right at the edge of the table, looking down at the scattered cards. "I will take that debt," the white-haired man said. His voice was low and smooth, like ice moving over water. Douglas stood up, his face turning red. He adjusted his gold chain. "This is a private game, sir. Who let you in here? We do not know you." "My name is Nathan Winter," the man said. He did not look at Douglas. He kept his eyes on the paper deeds. "I know your name, Mr. Crane. I also know you like to buy things that do not belong to you." Douglas took a step back, his hand resting on the back of his chair. "The debt is $8,000 in total. That is a city fortune. You cannot just walk into a room and claim it." Nathan reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a small piece of white paper and a black pen. He wrote a few words on the paper, his movements quick and precise. He dropped the paper into the middle of the green table, right over the cards. "A draft on the central bank," Nathan said. $90,000. 10,000 more than the debt. He looked up, his black eyes fixing on Douglas's face. "But the girl comes with me." Thomas looked from the white paper to the stranger. "Mr. Winter, please. You have never even seen my daughter. She does not know who you are." Nathan turned his head slightly toward Thomas. His face was perfectly still, like a statue. "She will know me tomorrow, Thomas. Go home to your wife. Tell her the house is safe." Douglas snatched the bank draft off the table, his fingers moving quickly. He looked at the signature, then at the seal on the paper. His greed was stronger than his anger. He stuffed the paper into his vest pocket, gathered his coat from the hook by the door, and walked out without looking back. The two men in the corner followed him, leaving the room completely empty. Thomas sat back down in his chair, his face buried in his hands. He was crying now, his shoulders shaking. "What have I done?" he whispered. "I saved my house, but I sold my daughter to a stranger." Nathan stood by the table for a moment longer. He did not look sorry for the older man. He pulled his black leather gloves back onto his hands, smoothing the leather down each finger. "I will be at your house tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Nathan said quietly. "Make sure she is ready to speak with me." He turned and walked out, leaving the room cold and silent. The fire in the library was nearly dead. A few red coals glowed in the dark, throwing a faint light over the rows of books. Maeve Cooper sat on the small stool by the hearth, her chin resting in her hands. She had a volume of old stories open on her knees, but she had not read a word in hours. The house was too quiet. Her mother was upstairs in bed, pretending to sleep, while her brother Sam was away at his school 3 hours north. She heard the front door click. Then came the sound of her father's boots. They were heavy, dragging against the floor as if he could barely lift his feet. Maeve stood up, setting her book on the table. She met him in the hallway. Thomas looked 10 years older. His tie was undone, and his coat was stained with gray ash from the club. He did not look at her. He walked straight into the library and sank into the large leather chair by the desk. "Father," Maeve said, walking over to him. She knelt by his side, touching his knee. His skin was cold. "What happened? Did we lose the store?" Thomas covered his face with his hands. "The store is safe, Maeve. The house is safe, too. I paid the bills." Maeve let out a long breath, her shoulders relaxing. "Then why do you look like this? If the money is sorted, we can rest. We can start over." "I did not find the money, Maeve," Thomas said, his voice cracking in the dark room. "A man paid it for me. Douglas Crane had all the papers. He wanted to take you as payment for the gambling losses. He was going to turn us out onto the street tomorrow at noon." Maeve went completely still. She knew Douglas Crane. He was a loud, cruel man who treated his horses badly and shouted at the servants in the street. "And you gave me to him?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No," her father said, looking up at her with wet eyes. Another man stepped into the room, a stranger. "His name is Nathan Winter. He paid $90,000 to Douglas. He bought every single debt I owe." Thomas caught her hands, his fingers shaking. "But he wants the same thing, Maeve. He wants you to marry him. He is coming here tomorrow at 2 o'clock to get his answer." Maeve pulled her hands back slowly. She stood up and walked over to the dark window, looking out at the empty street of Philadelphia. The gas lamps outside flickered in the wind. She had heard stories about Nathan Winter. The servants talked about him in the market. They said he lived in a huge stone house up in the mountains of New Hampshire, surrounded by deep woods. They said he never came out during the day, and that his hair was as white as a winter cloud, though his face looked young. "If I say no, what happens?" Maeve asked, her back to her father. "He takes the deeds," Thomas said simply. "He will own the store, the house, everything. We will have nothing left. Your brother will have to leave his studies to work at the mills." Maeve looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She was 23. She had spent her life learning how to take care of people, helping her mother with the house, and making sure Sam had everything he needed for his books. She did not know what kind of man Nathan Winter was, but she knew what poverty would do to her family. Her mother's health was poor, and her father would not survive a winter in the streets. "Tell the kitchen to prepare some tea for tomorrow afternoon," Maeve said, turning around to face her father. Her face was calm, though her heart was beating fast against her ribs. "I will meet Mr. Winter when he arrives. Go upstairs and sleep, Father. The trouble is over." The next afternoon was cold and bright. The sun shone down on the brick houses, but it gave no real warmth. At exactly 2 o'clock, a large black carriage turned the corner and stopped in front of the Cooper house. The carriage was completely black, with no markers or crests on the doors. The 2 horses pulling it were massive, their dark coats groomed until they looked like silk. Maeve stood by the drawing-room window, her fingers holding the edge of the curtain. She watched the carriage door open. Nathan Winter stepped out. In the daylight, he looked even more unusual than her father had described. His white hair was bright against the dark collar of his coat. His skin was so pale it looked almost translucent, like fine porcelain. He did not look at the houses around him. He walked straight up the stone steps to their door. A moment later, the old butler opened the drawing-room doors. His hands were shaking so much he could barely hold the silver tray. "Mr. Nathan Winter," he announced. Nathan walked into the room. The air around him felt clean and crisp, like the top of a mountain in December. He took off his black hat, revealing his striking white hair. His dark eyes swept over the room, resting on Maeve for a long, quiet moment. He bowed, a low, formal movement that belonged to an older time. "Miss Cooper," he said. His voice was steady and quiet. "Mr. Winter," Maeve replied, making a small curtsy. "Please, take a seat." Nathan sat down in the armchair across from her. He did not lean back. He sat with his hands resting flat on his knees, his long fingers perfectly still. Maeve's mother sat on the sofa nearby, her eyes red from crying, while her father stood near the door like a guard. "I believe we have some business to discuss," Nathan said, looking at Maeve. He did not look at her parents at all. "We do," Maeve said. She sat down opposite him, crossing her hands in her lap. "My father told me about the money you paid last night. You bought his debts." "I did," Nathan said. $90,000. The papers are now in my possession. Your father owes nothing to the club or to Douglas Crane. And in return, you want me to marry you," Maeve said, keeping her voice even. She wanted him to see that she was not afraid, even though her hands were cold. Nathan inclined his head slightly. "That is the term I set. You will come with me to my estate in New Hampshire. You will be the mistress of the house. You will manage the servants, take care of the household books, and sit across from me at dinner when I am there." He paused, his dark eyes fixing on hers. "In return, your family will receive $5,000 every year for their expenses. Your brother's school will be paid for until he finishes his medical degree." Maeve's mother let out a small sob into her handkerchief, but Maeve stayed focused on the man in front of her. "You are offering a great deal of money for a wife, Mr. Winter. You could find many women in this city who would marry you for your wealth." "I do not want a woman from the city," Nathan said simply. "They want balls, parties, and gossip. My home is quiet, it is cold. I need someone who understands duty. Your father told the whole room last night that you spent your life taking care of others. That is what I require." Maeve studied his face. There were no lines on his forehead, no marks of age, yet his eyes looked like they had seen things that happened long before she was born. "And what about affection, Mr. Winter? Do you expect me to love you?" Nathan's lips moved into a very small, flat smile. It did not look angry, just distant. "I do not ask for love, Miss Cooper. I do not offer it either. We are making a contract. If you fulfill your side, I will fulfill mine. You will have everything you need to live comfortably, and your family will never want for food or shelter again." Maeve looked at her father, who was staring at the floor, then at her mother. She knew there was only one choice to make. "I will marry you, Mr. Winter," she said. "On one condition." Nathan's white eyebrows rose slightly. "Name it." "My brother Sam must receive his allowance directly from your bank every month. My father must not have access to it. I want to ensure his education is safe, no matter what happens here." Nathan stood up, his tall figure blocking the sunlight from the window. "That is already written into the papers my lawyers are preparing. We will be married on Thursday morning at the local church. Have your things packed by 10 o'clock. We leave for the north immediately after the ceremony." He picked up his hat, bowed once to her, and walked out of the room. The church was small and cold on Thursday morning. Rain tapped against the stained glass windows, turning the light inside a dull, watery blue. Maeve stood at the back of the church, wearing a simple dress of gray wool. Her mother had tried to give her a veil, but Maeve had refused. This was not a real wedding. It was a signing of a lease. Her father held her arm as they walked down the short aisle. His hand was trembling, but Maeve felt steady. She looked toward the altar, where Nathan Winter was already waiting. He wore a black suit that looked completely new, his white hair neat and dry despite the rain outside. He stood perfectly still, not even turning his head as she approached. The minister was an old man with a cough. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between Nathan's pale face and the small black book in his hands. He read the service quickly, his voice shaking slightly when he asked for the vows. When Nathan spoke, his voice carried easily through the empty stone church. "I do," he said. The words were short, clean, and without any emotion. When it was her turn, Maeve looked him right in the eyes. "I do," she said clearly. Nathan reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a plain gold ring. He took her left hand. His fingers were completely bare, and the moment they touched her skin, Maeve had to bite her lip to keep from pulling away. He was freezing. It felt like holding a piece of river ice in the dead of winter. The coldness seemed to move up her arm, making her shiver, despite the heavy wool of her dress. He slid the ring onto her finger, with a steady, gentle pressure. "You may seal the vows," the minister said, clearing his throat. Nathan leaned down slowly. He did not catch her waist or take her hands. He simply pressed his lips to hers. They were dry and cold, leaving a sharp, frosty feeling against her skin that made her breath catch. The kiss lasted only a second before he stepped back, his face as smooth and calm as it had been when he first entered her house. They signed the ledger in the small side room. Maeve watched his long, pale fingers guide the pen across the paper, his signature large and sharp. Her father signed as the witness, his hand shaking so much he spilled a drop of blue ink onto the wood. "The carriage is ready," Nathan said, turning to Maeve as he pulled his black gloves back over his pale hands. "The road north is long, and the rain will make the horses slow. We should move." Maeve turned to her parents. Her mother embraced her tightly, weeping into her shoulder, while her father stood by the door, looking like he wanted to say something, but could not find the words. "Write to us, Maeve," her mother whispered. "Tell us how the house is." "I will, Mother," Maeve said, smoothing the older woman's hair. "Take care of Sam when he visits." She walked down the stone steps of the church beneath Nathan's large black umbrella. He held it over her head, ensuring the rain did not touch her dress, while his own shoulder grew wet in the storm. He helped her into the dark carriage, closed the door behind them, and sat down on the opposite bench as the horses began to move. The city of Philadelphia dropped behind them into the gray mist, and Maeve sat in the silence, her left hand still feeling the deep, cold weight of the gold band around her finger. The journey back from Philadelphia to the New Hampshire mountains took 2 full days. Maeve watched the green trees replace the brick buildings of the city. Nathan sat across from her in the dark carriage, his white hair leaning against the black leather cushion. He looked pale, his dark eyes half closed, as if the bright lights of the city ballroom had drained his energy. Maeve reached across the small space and adjusted the heavy wool blanket over his knees, noting how the coldness of his skin seemed even deeper after their encounter with Raymond Cross. They arrived at the stone house just as the sun went down behind the high ridges. Mrs. Weaver stood by the door, holding a lantern that cast a warm orange glow over the stone steps. Nathan got out of the carriage slowly, offering his hand to Maeve with his usual quiet politeness. His grip was still cold, but it felt steady and familiar to her now. He gave a brief nod to the housekeeper and walked straight toward his private study, his long black coat trailing behind him like a shadow in the dim hallway. Maeve spent the next morning in the kitchen, talking with the cook about the meals for the coming week. She asked for warm soups and fresh bread, wanting to make the house feel more comfortable after their long travels. Later, she carried a tray of hot tea up to the library, knowing Nathan spent his days there when the sun was high in the sky. She found him sitting at his desk, surrounded by large paper maps of the forest lands. He did not look up immediately, but she saw his shoulders relax as she set the tray down on the wood table. "You look tired, Nathan," Maeve said, sitting in the chair across from his desk. She poured a cup of tea for herself and pushed the small sugar bowl toward the center of the table. Nathan set his pen down, his long, pale fingers resting against the white paper. He looked at her, his dark eyes clearing, as he took a deep breath of the cool room air. "The city takes a lot out of me, Maeve," he said softly. "The noise, the constant movement, and the bright lights make it hard for me to keep my balance. I am glad to be back in the trees." Maeve picked up one of the forest maps, looking at the small ink lines that marked the boundaries of his land. She noticed that several sections near the southern river were marked with small red crosses. "What are these marks?" she asked, pointing her finger at the paper. Nathan leaned forward, his white hair falling slightly over his forehead. "Those are the old logging trails," he explained. "The ground there is soft, and the winter storms caused a lot of dirt to slide down into the valley. The people living in the small village below are having trouble with their water supply because of it. Can we do something to fix it?" Maeve asked, looking directly into his dark eyes. "We have the resources, and you own the land. It seems wrong to let them struggle when we have the means to clear the trails." Nathan looked surprised by her question, his pale face remaining still for a few seconds. "Most people in the valley avoid this house, Maeve," he said quietly. They look at my white hair and they stay away. They do not ask me for help, and I have learned to leave them to their own business. Maeve set her teacup down with a small click. They stay away because they do not know you, Nathan. They only see the big stone house and the closed gates. If we go down there and help them fix the riverbanks, they will see that you are a neighbor, not a threat. Nathan stood up from his chair, walking over to the large window that looked out toward the southern valley. He stood there for a long time, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the gray clouds move across the mountain peaks. It will take 30 men and 5 large wagons to move the rocks away from the river, Nathan said, turning back to face her. His voice was practical, already calculating the work needed for the task. I can send the estate workers down tomorrow morning with the tools. But I will not go myself, Maeve. My appearance tends to frighten the children in the village, and I prefer to avoid causing a scene. Maeve stood up and walked over to him, placing her hand gently on his arm. Then I will go with them, she said. I will tell the villagers that the Vampire King sent the help. Nathan looked down at her hand, his dark eyes showing a touch of warmth that she had never seen before. He did not pull away from her touch, allowing the warmth of her fingers to rest against his cold sleeve. You are a very determined woman, Maeve, he said, his lips curving into a small, real smile. Very well. Take the wagons and the men. Mrs. Weaver will help you prepare the supplies. Just promise me you will return before the sun goes down behind the mountains. Maeve nodded, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks, as she walked out of the library to find the housekeeper. The next morning started early with the sound of heavy iron wheels rolling across the stone courtyard. Maeve stood by the back door, checking the large wooden crates filled with blankets, flour, and dried meat that Mrs. Weaver had helped her pack. 30 strong men from the estate stood by the 5 wagons, holding shovels and axes, waiting for her signal to move out. Nathan did not come down to see them off, but Maeve caught a glimpse of his white hair at the high library window, his dark eyes watching her as she climbed onto the seat of the lead wagon. The trip down the winding mountain road took 2 hours, the heavy wagons creaking against the thick mud left by the spring rains. As they approached the small village of Oakhaven, Maeve saw the damage caused by the river slide. The water was brown and thick with mud, spilling over the wooden banks into the small gardens of the nearby houses. A group of local farmers stood near the old wooden bridge, their faces dark with worry as they tried to move large logs out of the blocked water channel with nothing but ropes and their own hands. Maeve climbed down from the wagon before it came to a complete stop, her boots sinking into the wet earth as she walked toward the village elder. An old man with a long gray beard and a faded wool vest stepped forward, looking at the long line of estate wagons with deep suspicion. I am Jonathan, the head of this village, he said, his voice rough and tired. We do not have any money to pay for wood or stone from the mountain, young lady. If your master is looking for taxes, you tell him we have nothing left to give this year. We are not here for money, Jonathan, Maeve said, offering him a warm smile as she reached out to shake his rough hand. My name is Maeve Winter. My husband, Nathan Winter, saw the damage to the river from the mountain trails. He sent these 30 men, 5 wagons, and all the tools you see here to clear the logs and rebuild the riverbanks for you. The old man stared at her, his eyes moving from her face to the large estate workers who were already unloading the heavy iron shovels from the back of the wagons. For the next 6 hours, the valley was filled with the sound of axes cutting through wood and men, shouting directions as they moved the rocks. Maeve worked alongside the village women, carrying baskets of dry bread and fresh cheese to the workers, while helping clear the smaller branches from the water. The local children, who had been hiding behind the wooden doors of their houses, slowly came out into the sunshine, watching the big estate horses pull the heavy logs out of the mud with easy strength. By noon, the water began to run clear again, moving safely down its normal path away from the houses. Jonathan walked over to Maeve as the sun began to sink toward the western hills, holding a small wooden cup of fresh milk. I must apologize to you, ma'am, he said, looking down at his muddy boots. We have heard many strange stories about the white-haired man on the hill. People say he is cold, that he never grows old, and that he hates the sound of human voices. We thought he wanted us to leave the valley so he could have the whole mountain to himself. Stories are just words, Jonathan, Maeve said gently, taking a slow sip of the cold milk. My husband prefers the quiet of the woods, it is true, but he does not hate people. He simply values his privacy. He was the one who noticed your trouble, and he was the one who ordered the wagons to be filled with food for your families." The old man nodded slowly, his face softening, as he looked at the clear water moving under the wooden bridge. "Tell him the village of Oakhaven thanks him for his kindness," he said. The wagons rolled back up the mountain road, just as the first stars began to appear in the purple evening sky. Maeve was exhausted, her dress stained with gray mud and her hands sore from lifting the wooden baskets, but she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. When she entered the great hall of the estate, the fire was burning brightly in the hearth, throwing long shadows across the stone floor. Nathan was waiting for her, sitting in the large armchair near the flames with a heavy wool blanket draped over his lap. He stood up as she approached, his dark eyes scanning her muddy dress and her tired face with a look of quiet concern. He did not say anything at first, but he reached out and took her wet coat, handing it to a nearby maid before guiding Maeve toward the warm fire. "The river is clear, Nathan?" she said, her voice dropping to a weary whisper as she sank into the chair. "They sent their thanks to you." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, his white hair shining in the firelight. "You did a good thing today, Maeve," he said softly, his cold hand resting gently against the top of her head. "Perhaps the mountain is not as lonely as it used to be." The autumn winds arrived 2 months later, turning the green leaves of the forest into a sea of deep red and bright orange. The air became sharp and cold, forcing Maeve to spend more of her time inside the thick stone walls of the estate. She worked with Mrs. Weaver to bring out the heavy winter curtains and store the dried apples in the cellar for the cold months ahead. Nathan remained in his usual routine, but Maeve noticed that he spent more time in the library with her during the late afternoons, listening to her read from her books while the wind patterns shifted outside the glass windows. One evening, after a particularly heavy rainstorm had passed over the mountain, Nathan opened a small wooden door at the back of the library that Maeve had never noticed before. He held a small silver lantern in his hand, its light showing a narrow stone staircase that led down into the foundations of the house. "There is something I want to show you, Maeve," he said, his dark eyes looking down at her with a quiet gravity. "It is a part of my life that I have never shared with anyone else, but I think you are ready to see it." Maeve followed him down the cool stone steps, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder to keep her balance in the dim light. At the bottom of the stairs, the air suddenly became warm and sweet, smelling of fresh earth and rare flowers. Nathan pushed open a heavy iron door, revealing a massive underground glass house that stretched beneath the southern terrace of the estate. Large glass panels in the ceiling let in the faint light of the moon, showing hundreds of beautiful, night-blooming white flowers that grew along the stone walls. "This is my garden," Nathan said, setting the silver lantern down on a small stone bench in the center of the room. "These flowers only open when the sun goes down, and they require the cool air of the mountain to survive. I brought the seeds from a distant country across the sea many lifetimes ago, when I was still trying to find a place where I could belong." Maeve walked along the narrow stone paths, her fingers gently touching the soft white petals of a large flower that looked like a star. "They are beautiful, Nathan," she said, turning back to look at him. He was standing in the moonlight, his white hair and pale skin making him look like he was made of the same light as the flowers around him. "Why did you hide this place from the world?" Nathan sat down on the stone bench, his long fingers folding together in his lap. "Because the world changes too fast, Maeve," he said quietly. "Cities rise and fall, people grow old and pass away, but these flowers remain the same. They are the only things that connect me to the past." Maeve walked back over to the bench and sat down beside him, ignoring the cool air that seemed to rise from his skin. She looked at his profile, noting the quiet sadness that always seemed to linger at the corners of his mouth when he spoke of the past. "Do you ever get lonely, Nathan?" she asked softly. "Living here for so long, watching the world move on without you must be a heavy burden to carry every day." Nathan turned his dark eyes to face her, his expression perfectly still in the dim moonlight. "I was lonely for a very long time, Maeve," he admitted, his voice dropping to a low murmur that sounded like the wind through the pine trees outside. "When I paid your father's debts in City Room, I thought I was simply buying a companion to keep the silence away from this house. I did not expect to find someone who would look into his red eyes and not run away in fear. Maeve reached out and placed both of her hands over his cold ones, feeling the sudden stillness that came over his body at her touch. "I did not stay here because of the contract, Nathan," she said clearly, her voice echoing softly against the glass ceiling of the garden. "At first I came to save my family, but I stay now because I choose to be here. I stay because I have found a man who is gentler and truer than anyone I have ever known in the city." Nathan did not speak for a long time, but his dark eyes grew deep and clear as he looked into her face. He raised his hand slowly, his cold fingers brushing a stray lock of hair away from her forehead, with a tenderness that made her breath catch in her throat. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, and this time the coldness did not startle her. It felt like the clean, fresh snow of the mountain, a part of his nature that she accepted completely as they sat together among the night-blooming flowers. 5 years passed over the mountain estate like a quiet river, bringing changes that filled the old stone house with a new kind of warmth. The heavy velvet curtains in the drawing room were often pulled back now, letting the morning sunshine stream across the polished wood floors where a small girl with bright dark eyes liked to play. Her name was Lily, and she had inherited her mother's warm smile and her father's quiet, steady gaze. She spent her mornings running through the long hallways, her small leather shoes making a happy sound that had never been heard in the house before. Nathan had changed too, though his face remained as smooth and pale as the day he had walked into the Philadelphia card room. He was a gentle father, often spending his evenings sitting on the library floor with Lily, showing her the colorful pictures in the old books, or building small wooden houses for her toys with his long, careful fingers. The servants no longer walked with their heads down. They moved with an easy confidence, knowing that the white-haired master of the house was a protector who cared for their families as much as his own. In the second year of their marriage, Maeve had given birth to a son, whom they named Owen. He was a quiet baby, with soft white hair that made Mrs. Weaver weep with joy the first time she held him in her arms. Owen spent most of his days sleeping in a small wooden cradle near the library fire, his small hands catching his father's long fingers whenever Nathan leaned down to check on him. The house that had once been known as a cold castle on the hill had become a place of life and safety. One bright spring afternoon, a familiar carriage turned the corner of the mountain drive and stopped in front of the stone steps. Maeve hurried down the stairs, her dress rustling against the stones as she saw her brother Sam step down from the vehicle. He looked older now, his shoulders broader, and his face filled with the confidence of a young man who had finished his medical studies at the City Academy. He ran up the steps and caught Maeve in a tight embrace, laughing with a pure joy that filled the entrance hall. "You look wonderful, Maeve," Sam said, stepping back to look at her face. "The city was full of rumors about this place, but I can see that you are happier than anyone I know in Philadelphia. Father and mother send their love. They are doing well, and the store is prospering under the new managers we hired last winter." Maeve smiled, her eyes wet with tears of relief as she led her brother into the drawing room where Nathan was waiting for them. Nathan stood up as Sam entered, bowing with his usual formal politeness. He did not offer his cold hand, knowing that humans were often startled by his nature, but Sam walked straight over to him and extended his own hand with a look of deep respect. "Thank you, Nathan," Sam said clearly, his grip firm against the white-haired man's fingers. "The money you sent every month paid for my books, my room, and my training. I could not have become a doctor without your help, and my family owes you a debt we can never fully repay." "There is no debt between us, Sam," Nathan said quietly, his voice smooth and steady. "Your sister fulfilled her side of our agreement long ago, and she has given this house more than $90,000 could ever buy. You are welcome here whenever you wish to visit." Sam looked at his sister, then back at the tall, pale man, seeing the deep understanding that existed between them, a bond that had grown far beyond the simple contract signed in a church years ago. That evening, the family sat together around the long mahogany table for dinner. The room was bright with the light of dozens of white candles, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and easy conversation, as Sam shared stories about his time at the medical academy. Lily sat next to her father, eating small pieces of sweet apple from his plate, while Owen slept peacefully in his cradle by the hearth. Maeve looked down the length of the table, her heart swelling with a deep, quiet gratitude for the life they had built together on this mountain. After Sam had gone upstairs to rest from his long journey, Maeve walked out onto the stone terrace, looking at the dark forest stretching out beneath the stars. The night was calm and quiet, the wind moving gently through the high pine branches. Nathan walked out to join her, his long black coat open against the cool night air as he stood by her side. He did not say anything, but he slid his cold hand into hers, his fingers locking with her warm ones as they watched the pale moon rise over the distant valley, lighting up the path they had chosen to walk together. Standing on the terrace with Nathan by her side, Maeve looked out over the dark trees and thought about the strange path that had brought her to this mountain. Life had a way of shifting when a person least expected it, turning a moment of deep despair into the beginning of something beautiful. She remembered the fear she had felt in her father's library, a young woman facing an uncertain future with nothing but her own determination to keep her family safe. She had thought she was giving up her freedom to pay a gambler's debt, entering into a cold contract with a man the world feared. But looking at the warm lights of the house behind her and feeling the steady touch of her husband's hand, she realized that true freedom was not about avoiding the storms of life, but about finding someone who would stand with you through the dark. Love was not a grand declaration made in a crowded ballroom. It was a quiet choice made every single day in the small actions of care and respect. It was found in the way Nathan carried their daughter through the halls, the way he supported her brother's dreams, and the way he opened his guarded heart to let her inside. As she looked toward the long years ahead, she knew there would be more winters and more storms, but she felt no fear. They had built their home on a foundation of honesty and shared quiet, and that was more than enough to keep the cold away for the rest of their days.